Good morning, everyone. We are heading for the start of this second day of our third International Congress of the Chair for the Responsible Development of the Metaverse. Welcome, everyone, again. Yesterday was a fantastic day full of ideas, full of meaningful exchanges, and with wonderful sessions, but they will not match this one. I have with me three fantastic panelists to talk about, to help me disentangle and to help me tackle all the many legal, ethical, and philosophical interesting ideas around the industrial metaverse. We are trying to bring the ideas into the action, into the real economy and the real developments within companies, within the private sector. For that, I have with me Kasper Drążewski, a senior researcher at the Center of IT and IP Law at KU Leuven. Welcome, Kasper. Begoña González Otero, a senior research fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition. And Marta, Duque, a lawyer at the Pérez-Llorca law firm. Welcome. Very well. As I was mentioning, at the chair we believe, and myself, I'm Javier López, a research fellow at the University of Alicante and part of the team of the MetaverseUA Chair. As I was mentioning, at the chair we believe that the immersive technologies are moving towards a further development, a further growth into a concrete economic, organizational, and regulatory practice that overcome the speculative narratives that were around the beginning of these technologies. Extended reality, virtual worlds, digital twins, interoperable data environments, and artificial intelligence, among others, are converging into these platforms. And the development of the metaverse, virtual worlds, Web 4.0, and in general, XR, AR, and VR technologies are converging into very interesting and very deep interdisciplinary ideas that we are trying to cover, we are going to try to cover in this panel. We are already witnessing some tensions in the economy, in the private sector development, with very interesting and very challenging developments in the use of digital twins in the health domain, for instance, BIM advanced models in architecture, avatars for human-machine relation replication in factories and in industrial environments, and many other developments that merit attention, reflection, and hopefully an interesting discussion also with the Q&A session after the intervention of our wonderful panelists. For that, we will start with the development of Kasper. I will be sharing the presentation now. So there you have, Kasper, the floor is yours. Please.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I must admit, as I was just telling the colleagues, that I had fallen victim to my own brain, arranging and rearranging everything until the last minute. So I guess if there's any time to record that Leonard Cohen cover album, it's now. I hope my brain warms up over time and my throat. But thank you very much for this kind invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor to be part of this discussion. And what I'm going to be discussing today is a work stream that Natalie Bertels and I are considering launching. And I'm very much counting on your input in the Q&A. If you don't like it, tell me. If you feel something's missing, tell me. If everything is, if the direction merits further discussion, we might have some interesting findings that could perhaps even try to respond to some of the questions asked yesterday by Verita. I'm going to, just a little background, because most of you I haven't had the pleasure of talking to. My career has been all over the place. I was a lawyer for 11 years. Then I did my PhD. Then I was a consumer rights activist and an academic liaison for the digital fairness discussions in Brussels. And then when the research part was done, I turned back into an academic. The years in Brussels had given me a massive burnout, but also at the same time, front row seats for a lot of important discussions. In hindsight, it was incredible to have been there when DigiConnect was pushing the digital regulations. Also when there was the furious rewriting of the AI Act, when ChatGPT came about during the trilogues, and the framework was no longer compatible. And now I'm part of many work streams at CiTiP, bridging consumer law, open science, digital regulation, and IP regulation. And as part of that, it was my pleasure to also contribute to, well, we all contributed to the strategic research and innovation agenda for virtual worlds in Web 4.0 for the European Commission. So if you're familiar with the document, you may recognize some familiar themes in this presentation. What's this one? Yeah, I was triggered. Some of the rewriting that I did was triggered by yesterday's discussion. We talked about control of anonymity in the metaverse, in virtual worlds. There is the general expectation of anonymity on a peer-to-peer social level. Of course, the platform knows who you are, or thinks it knows, because again, the Sharia also flags that in some cases the identification is not certain, and further means balancing privacy and at the same time efficient enforcement are necessary. It's one of the research directions. But I find it striking that while your identity can be revealed by the platform to enforcement authorities if you're suspected of committing a crime, there's also the other category, which is the worker. And by that, I mean a worker in, I'm sorry, maybe it's too small. I was struggling. I see some of you squinting in the back. I tried to increase the font size, actually, after yesterday, because I couldn't see from back there. Worker of big companies, those massive stores, workers which are already, as things are, monitored very closely in terms of what they do with their time, how efficient they are. And they are signing an employment contract. So if you're a private lawyer, if you're a civilist, you will likely not see a problem. It's contract law, and then we have labor law that addresses the inequalities, and we're happy. It's the same discussion as, and here I'm coming to my point. It's the same discussion that we are having in consumer law right now. There is still the fundamental belief in the contract between two informed, reasonable parties. There are some structural inequalities which are addressed by consumer law. This is why we need consumer law on top of contract law. And this paradigm has been crumbling over the past few years because a lot has happened in consumer law, definitely in the last decade, but the most interesting developments are the last 5-6 years. We have seen the crumbling of the informed consent, the factoring in the cognitive overload We have seen publications discussing how consent does not work. Well, in the words of Hans Miklitz, regulators reach for consent if they have no better idea on what to do. That was the case in the GDPR, and this paradigm is still being perpetuated, because it's true that if you look at the new digital regulation from this perspective, it is obvious that we still don't have viable, feasible policy choices that are broadly consented to, other than information disclosure and then consent. We have seen the crumble of the understanding of what constitutes a transaction. This is still not everywhere this is still a new thing at national level. So far, Italy, as I briefly mentioned yesterday, so far Italy has adopted this new guidance to the UCPD, the non-binding guidance, unfortunately, even though the Commission did formulate it this time as a Commission notice. This is quite funny if you're following the Commission notices in competition law, because there they actually are binding. So this time they called it a notice here as well, but they do state clearly in the preamble that this is not binding. What's important here is that this guidance document tells us that even if you're in a situation where you're scrolling through a newsfeed, if you're clicking on content, you are making transactional decisions. Meaning you deserve protection, just as if you were paying with your own money. National attitudes to this still vary. This is going to be a slow adoption. Italy was the first with their ruling of the Autorità Garante in TikTok. Now it's under judicial review. Fingers crossed for that one. It was a very well-written decision. So a lot changed in consumer law. I was lucky to be coordinating the research and advocacy projects at BEUC, the European Consumer Organization, where we had A-grade academics trying to find what's not working in the old paradigm, what is needed. And one of the conclusions was that the social contract, as we know it, is no longer there. We are becoming divided into those who are put in a situation of having to use these services. There's a very interesting paper by Peter Roth of Oldenburg on the understanding of essential services of general interest in regard to digital platforms. There is also a new project now being launched by the European Law Institute called Essential, which is also going to be looking at this. So consumers no longer have a choice. If you want to function in today's society, function actively, you have to use certain services. You don't know how they work. You don't understand how they work. You cannot understand how they work. That was difficult enough 10 years ago. Now with AI, it's completely impossible. In 2020, studies were released by the Norwegian Consumer Council, the Forbrukerrådet, which traced data flows between companies. They basically lifted the bonnet on how the online data collection ecosystem works, because they put hackers on the job. And only then, after having spent a year deciphering privacy policies for Claudette, the automated clause detector and assessment tool, which we were trying to build at the EUI. By the way, it's still there. It's doing much better than when I was there. Only then I could see what was actually happening to that data, and that that if they say we might share your data with our trusted marketing partners, it means that your data may actually end up with Donald Trump's re-election campaign, because that was one of the examples that they had given. So you no longer have control. You don't know what's going on. You don't have a choice. Very often you don't know you're in a transaction. You don't know you deserve protection. And if you do know and you're trying to do something about it, you're doomed to doing case-by-case enforcement, which is lengthy, costly, difficult. 60% of our respondents, when we polled 8 member states at BEUC, said that they see no reason to complain because the chance of success is so low. So that's consumer law. But when you think about it, why do we limit this argument to consumer law as such? There are many categories you could expand this to. Today, I want to flag to you that perhaps there is a discussion to be had in terms of workers. There are four dimensions of this digital asymmetry of knowledge and power. Power understood both as contracting power and as power over dynamically shaping the algorithmic choice architectures, choice environments. And these I'm going to briefly. How am I doing for time? Good. All right. And these I'm going to briefly showcase today, and then I will ask for your opinions. So first, the matter of anonymity that I already managed. When it is the consumer being subjected to algorithmic data collection, they have the counterpart is the platform. When you're an employee and you've signed away your control over how you function in the metaverse, the control over the depth of your immersion, the control over the length of the immersion, because this is part of your contract. You have a triangular surveillance model because your principals are the platform, but also the employer. This doesn't happen to consumers. This I already discussed about. When you briefly compare the rights of a criminal suspect under due process and the worker, you may actually start wondering whether the worker is actually not in a worse position, because at least the criminal suspect gets judicial oversight, they get proportionality, they get the presumption of innocence, whereas the worker signs away their rights in a way that they cannot understand. I wouldn't understand. I mentioned Claudette. We were trying to we had a team of lawyers working on a corpus of 100 privacy policies of the leading service providers. We spent that year basically fighting over what is happening with that data because we could not agree what was the message. So if you're a good Marxist, you could also look at class disempowerment, because who goes to work for such platforms? People who are not necessarily in a privileged position in life. They will be probably even less capable to find out what rights they're signing away. The second dimension is the digital vulnerability concept. This was the starting point for the research that I mentioned in 2020. And this was sort of a reaction to the still surviving, very much embedded in law, and now repeated in the AI Act, this outdated, and some even say stigmatizing understanding of vulnerability, which ties it to your personal traits. So if you're particularly susceptible to a certain type of, I'm not going to say manipulation. Manipulation was a forbidden word because manipulation requires proving intent. Proving intent is impossible, as we all know. So your susceptibility to certain forms of influence is derived from your age, your credulity. So this is why the discussion of stigmatization, because nobody wants to be put in that position to be claiming that they don't have the full mental capacity to make these decisions. And then Natalie Hillberger and Hans Miklitz came up with the concept of digital vulnerability. It was the time when Google was advertising their capacity of identifying emotional states. They called them micro moments. And then targeting a person in that given moment with a certain message. It was a time of, we were still recovering from the aftermath of Cambridge Analytica and trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Digital vulnerability was defined as this universal susceptibility, so this dispositional vulnerability to practices which exploit the differences in power on the basis of personalization, on the basis of profiling. I'm not going to go into the details here because I think it's more or less self-explanatory. So the bottom line is digital vulnerability is not a trait of a person. It's the product of the environment that this person is placed in. And if you compare, again, if you apply this to the worker is in a even worse position than the consumer when you think about it. You cannot just get up and leave because it's your livelihood. Your survival depends on it. If you're a consumer, you can always, like, in the extreme case, you can just delete your social media accounts. You can go completely dark. Your experience of the internet will be worse. Some pages won't load, as all of you know who have tried blocking certain trackers. Airlines are my favorite. But you have control. You can get up and leave. You can control to a degree your immersion. Workers cannot. Nobody's monitoring your cognitive load when you're a consumer. Sorry. The common ground is there is knowledge asymmetry because the consumer doesn't know what's going on, what's really going on. The worker doesn't know in most cases either. And they get rights to disclosure. I will get to that, but information does not create knowledge, or at least not always. It seems it's much less so than the consensus is. Third dimension. We have protection for workers. We have the Platform Work Directive, which mandates human oversight. We have transparency provisions and the obligation to inform workers and worker representatives of automated decision-making and the results thereof. There is the prohibition of using biometrics for identification. There is the right to challenge automatically made decisions. And the question is, in the light of what we discussed here yesterday, my claim is this is by far not enough. Because disclosure doesn't help, case-by-case enforcement doesn't help. How long? 20 seconds. Oh, shit. All right. Okay. Sorry. I get this way sometimes. I'll be quick. You can also look at Article 25 of the AI Act and Annex 3, which lists employment AI systems. And you get, certainly XR training, evaluation, monitoring will fall under Annex 3.4. But when you dissect it, when you look at the remedies that are there, they're not really helpful to the worker. They are there because we need them there, but they are not something that those people earning minimal wage and only thanks to the Platform Work Directive getting an employment contract, because that was one of the major legislative goals on that directive. They're not going to use the AI Act. They don't even understand it. Many of us don't understand it, or the logic behind some of the provisions. I love this slide. This is something that I update every now and then because I aim to show the last 12 months. This is a little aside from the topic, but bear with me. As you know, when platforms are taking down content, that's not very visible, is it? When platforms are taking down content under the DSA, they are required to produce statements of reasons. The statistics of those statements of reasons are absolutely ridiculous. Most of them just say that it's an other violation of terms and conditions, so very helpful. But this, I want you to pause for a moment on this shocking disproportion between how platforms respond if it's not in their economic interest to take down content. And there's one case where it is in their economic interest, and this one is Google Shopping. So I take this as a very good example of the difference between when there is an economic incentive to act and when enforcement is entrusted to the platform, but the platform is working against its economic interest and therefore less motivated to act quickly. And as we all know, in terms of content takedowns, after a few weeks, it's pointless because exposure has already been there. There's already been millions of hits and people have already been exposed to the content, so why bother? So this is the difference between enforcing for real and pretending that we're enforcing. Kennedy said that we're all consumers. And I hate the term consumer. I can say this because I'm an academic. I'm no longer a policy activist. My freedom of speech is considerably broader. I absolutely despise the term consumer. People die a little internally when I start talking about consumers. Nobody wants to self-identify as a consumer. Consumers consume, infest. They don't create anything new. They don't innovate. They're just there to reap the fruits of somebody else's intellectual work. A terrible word. But why are we limiting this to consumers? Am I less of a consumer when I'm when I'm paying for Claude AI to help me managing my conference invitations, and I'm paying for it myself, but I'm using it in connection with my work, so I'm no longer a consumer there? Why? If I'm using the same headset at work and then buying at a virtual store and then participating in a citizens meeting in the town hall, it's still me. It's still my own data that's traveling with me to some extent because I have no control over how it is traveling. But why do I get protection in one context but I don't get it in others? So that is my last and final point. Is that even the right category to discuss? And in a way, I'm grateful for the industrial metaverse for bringing this to the forefront. We have labor law. It regulates conditions of work, but not the architectures of immersive systems. We have the AI Act, which regulates, but it's a product safety regulation. It's not. Its framework is not useful for this purpose. And then we have the consumer acquis, which is just not applicable in these cases. And this is the point I want to leave you with. Why do we stick to the protection linked to a transaction? Why do we try to invent new meanings of what a transaction is instead of looking at the process, looking at the immersion, looking at the immersed individual and not whether they're buying something? Thank you so much. I'll be very happy to hear your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasper. Just for the start of the panel, we managed to kill consumers and to kill the social contract, just for the very start. Luckily, Rousseau is not in the audience, but I'm pretty sure your comments will raise many, many questions. We will address them when the rest of the panelists are through. And I move now to Begoña for her presentation. I will show your slides very quickly. Perfect. Yeah. Very well. Begoña, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yep. Okay. So good morning. So we kill the social contract, we kill the consumer. Let's keep on killing. Yeah, why not? It's Friday morning. And interoperability as a regulatory technique. That's the title. And it needs a subtitle, indeed, when law runs ahead of standards. And when Aurelio asked me about, okay, when he invited me and he asked me to work on interoperability, I recall we already have this conversation, kind of, no? But it was a couple of years ago. 2023, December. But the point is that when he asked me that, and I recall that after I prepared this presentation and I work on this topic, and my main point here, and that's why I want to recall that presentation, is that I think that the argument has changed, that the situation has changed, and that the point of gravity has shifted completely. Why? Well, because at the time, in 2023, and bear with me, because interoperability is a long story, so, you know, it's like we will arrive on May the 4th, and May the 4th be with us, May interoperability be with us. It's kind of the same metaphor. But at the time, I was looking at interoperability in the metaverse mainly through a competition law lens, no? Focusing mainly on consumer-related measures, because that's also what, at the end of the day, we want with competition law. I mean, we want more innovation, we want more competition, but because we want more consumer welfare, no? That's, yeah, it's always linked, it's always there. So the focus were more on portability and access measures. But I have the feeling that now that we have moved into this reloading of the metaverse, into the industrial metaverse, the problem looks different. And it's not because the original concern has disappeared, but it's because, as I said, the center of gravity, it's really shifting. And it's because interoperability is no longer working only as a technical feature. If we look at the EU acquis, the old EU legislation, interoperability, it's increasingly functioning as a regulatory technique. And that's the argument that I want to show you today, and I want to explain you why I'm saying this and where I'm coming from. Because at the end of the day, what we see is that law, it's already relying a lot on interoperability to shape access, accountability, we mentioned switching, and even market organization. The problem is that technical standards and implementation pathways are lagging behind. And the problem is that that gap that is lifted there is where sovereignty and all these discourses about digital sovereignty, competition, but also control are increasingly decided. So, as I said, in 2023, I approached this issue through this general metaverse frame, and that lens was more on competition law. And the question was, can regulation facilitate interoperability? But now I think we need to focus more, or that the hard question is more on, can the European Union, can Europe turn interoperability mandates into technical standards, let's put it like that, before lock-in happens? And because the problem, or to me, what I think the underlying concern, it's still remaining, it's who controls the conditions of interconnection. And what change is where that concern has to be located. And as you can see from the slide, there is a really good paper, really good study commissioned by Anek and Boyk to Professor Miklitz, coming again here, on standards in the future of EU digital policy legislation. And he already points there that EU harmonized standards, technical standards, and he proved that, so I invite everyone to read that report, are part of the legal problem and are actually part of the law acquis, and I will explain that later. So all these focus on interoperability from these portability, access, and competition measures, yeah, it's still there, but I think we need a just change in hierarchy because we need to focus much more on the legal effects of standards, publication, but also application layer bottlenecks, and this control and sovereignty discourse. So those are mainly the three features that I see. First, that is interoperability as a feature, to interoperability as governance, from generic virtual worlds to these industrial systems that are built around digital twins, but also testing, conformity, and so on and so forth. And from this lower layer openness to the application layer standards that are the real bottleneck for this competition and sovereignty of EU solutions, let's put it like that, to happen. And here what you can see, it's a bit of what has changed in these shifts and a bit of recap of literature. The survey report from 2024, there are two really good papers or reports, one from the IEC on the industrial metaverse per se, but another also from Felix, and three other scholars from the Bertelsmann Foundation. In a paper also from Fabiana Di Porto that works more on the idea of interoperability as a governance feature too, that goes also quite in line with my thoughts. And also one paper here that I will come up later on that I think is really important in terms of the idea that it defends or it develops, that it's from Jimena Tamaño. It's a recent PhD graduate here from Spain, from Valladolid. And her idea of economic dependence and precisely on how we need to look at 102 and abuse of dominance might play a super important role here. So, as I said, the point is that interoperability has shifted and has turned because if we don't have interoperability, we will never have industrial metaverse. It's as easy as it sounds. Because the value proposition of the industrial metaverse depends on integration across several elements, from digital twins tools, but also firms, sites, data flows, data spaces, compliance processes, virtual prototyping, testing, conformity assessment, and I keep on going, but it will get you really bored, and it's still too early Friday morning. But the problem is that if those things do not interoperate, if they don't communicate and understand each other, then we don't have an industrial metaverse. That's it. What we will have are gardens, and we know that already. We have already this problem with the platform, so it's not an old problem that we're not aware of. In that sense, the IEC report that you can see also, the image, it's from them. It's especially useful here because it actually places the industrial metaverse around design, around testing, optimization, failure prediction, maintenance, but also even virtual conformity assessment. So everything keeps moving into these digital worlds, everything. And if we don't have interoperability, what we will have, as I said, it's different platforms. So it's repeating the same story over and over again. Yet, interoperability is a nice wish, but it comes with a caveat. And on that, I would like to recall, the work that we have done at the MPI, and especially work that I have performed with a very dearest colleague of mine, with Jörg Hoffman, on data interoperability, but that it could be actually translated to interoperability at all levels. And we think also that we need a lot of caution. when you're wishing for something, you need to be cautious because you might not get exactly, it's like the genie in the bottle. And this is important because once interoperability becomes self-justifying and it's not a means to an end, but it becomes an end in itself, then regulation starts losing precision. And if you have a look at all the EU acquis from the early 19th up to now, you will find that. Actually, we did that exercise. We never managed to publish the paper, but because at the end it was a massive, huge paper that it could have become a book, but then all the acts from DigiConnect and Thierry Breton keep coming, so it was like, it will be a never-ending story. But what we think is that the real question that also policymakers and the legislator needs to ask when we're wishing for interoperability is interoperability for what? For what concretely? For switching, for more contestability, for safety, for auditability, for sovereignty, for trust, because different goals will require different forms, different layers, and also different degrees of interoperability. And with all these measures, there will always be trade-offs. So it does not come alone. You wish for something, but you need, like with the genie in the bottle, you need to give something away. So that's the real question. Interoperability, yes, but for what? At which layer? And under which standard setting model? Because as Professor Miglitz already pointed in this report, and yesterday we have a brief of a mention on that, but I would like to remind everybody here that EU technical standards are no longer background. We have case law from the Court of Justice that clearly says that they condition legal effects. And this is why Professor Miglitz was so stressing and insistent that when we're looking at technical standards in the digital policy and in the digital policy legislation of the EU, we cannot look at them as appendixes or tech appendixes anymore. In the case from 2016, James Elliott, it tells us already that harmonized standards can form part of EU law because of their legal effects. But just some years later, in 2022, Stichin already raises the issue of publication and legal uncertainty. These are principles of legislation, not technical. And if we look more recently in 2024, publicresource.org, that actually goes further by recognizing the overriding public interest. Public interest, remember social contract before? Public interest is also coming here. In disclosure, precisely because harmonized standards form part of EU law owing to their legal effects. So, standards, EU technical standards are no longer technical support, and they are also part of the legal problem. And this is crucial and super important for the industrial metaverse because law is already presupposing forms of interoperability that standards have not yet fully operationalized. There is where we have that gap. And I would like to show you that, yes, I mean, this is the part probably when we stop working on that paper that we were reviewing all the EU acquis. Because, yes, we have the DMA already working for a couple of years. We have the Data Act. We also have the AI Act. But the problem is that it's not the absence of law. It's that the laws that we have in general, when we look at that from the perspective of industrial metaverse, even from platforms or platformization, they are partial, they are misaligned, and they are under-operationalized. There are really good papers from Colangelo and Blanca, here from also another Spanish scholar in competition law, that they have worked on how the DMA processes are working, what is happening there with the compliance, and whether the vertical interoperability measures are bringing us anywhere closer to where they want. And the result is that so far they are not. And in some cases, they might be even benefiting the proper subject of the regulation, which is the gatekeeper, because of the backdoors that the legislator left there. Yeah, it's true that, same as we said yesterday, the AI Act, they are, in motion, they are live animals, they can be revisited, they can be amended. However, we already have the problem. When we look at the Data Act, in my opinion, it's even worse because we have a full chapter dedicated to interoperability of data spaces, and still the implementation legislation that the Commission should have already put in place under Article 35, we have no idea what is happening there. And it's been 3 years. But we want data spaces, but we don't have the interoperability and we don't have the technical standards, at least not the EU technical standards, no? And I'm emphasizing that for a reason that I'm going to go into, and I'm already closing up or wrapping up my argument. So, and again, even when we look at the AI Act, and especially when we look at portability rights, and portability, consumer portability alike rights that we also have in the EU acquis, on top of the GDPR, we go to some of the directives on trade, so transactions, yeah? And we do have certain portability-like rights embedded there, but they are not working. Nobody knows they exist. That's the first thing. And then nobody knows how to enforce them, or when you try to enforce them, actually what you might get, it's not a proper migration that you might have under a service level agreement, or no, you don't get that migration. You might get a bunch of stuff and then deal with it, no? So that's not the same as automated real-time migration of identities, as we talked yesterday, assets, value, and compliance evidence across environment. But that's also why these standards coming from the wallet that are open European standards are so important. So, and they are very important because, we're talking about the EU, and the EU is the case study, but it's not the whole horizon. We live in a bigger world, and actually we're running a bit behind. There is a really interesting and very well written paper by a scholar, so University of Amsterdam, Nora von Ingerselven-Zijp, and it's very recent, and I really like the way that she presents the fact that we actually, when we look at that globally, we actually are increasingly developing two metaverses. One is the Western consumer metaverse that is led by the US big tech. That's developing. We have standards there. That's happening because private companies are pushing in that sense, because it's for consumers. But we also have the Chinese industrial metaverse, digital twins, the repairance, maintenance, virtual tooling, all that. That it's led by Chinese big tech. And of course, not only Chinese big tech, we know what is behind the Chinese big tech. In the EU, by contrast, and I'm not saying that I'm against that, I'm very much in favor of that, because I like the fact that we live in a geographical part of the world, or in a region where we put the protection of fundamental rights before anything. So we're aiming for open, interoperable metaverse that respects digital rights and creates opportunity for European firms. That's the goal, that's the aim. That's fantastic, but we are lacking the same implementation power. We are not producing standards. We might have some international standards, not ISO, IEEE, and so on. But this also, it's important because I think we need to realize that this is a transnational political economy problem. And openness, contestability, and interoperability are shaped not only by law, but by who controls the platforms, the clouds, the AI systems, and the standards capacity. And if you look at these four, the problem is that none of these four are developing in Europe. So when open visions are not matched by implementation power, what we might have are private ecosystems that harden into that default architecture. And in that point, and this is almost my last slide, And here is where I think the Petrolman's and Felix's study from last year, it's very on point, is that the applications layer standards are the missing bridge if we want at this point of the game, because, you know, the race is already happening. This is non-stopping. So what we already know is that lower layer openness does not automatically produce upper layer freedom. Doesn't matter, no, if below you have open, because, and we can see that already with gatekeepers and the vertical integration and the vertical obligations. It's not happening. Actually, I can tell you, I have a lot of friends that are telling me, but why on earth now when I click on Google Maps, it's not working when you're in Spain or when you're in a European EU country. It's not working. It was so easy before. It was convenient. And it's, I mean, we don't have comparable, or we don't have other options. Or we don't have other options, but we need to navigate, you need to know more. So again, the application layer is where switching, identity, dependence, and real user choice now sit. And that affects both B2B, B2C, B2G, all types of relations. And the central point that they make in this report is that without interoperability standards that reach the application layer, digital sovereignty, this core aim that we have, this wish, no, remains fragile. But this is because meaningful choice remains also fragile. So, if law remains abstract, while the application layer implementation is at the end left to dominant private actors, or where we have economic dependence, then sovereignty and competition will continue to be shaped through private ecosystems. So, I mean, yep. And with that, I would like kind of to close, no? Because that's also where this paper from Jimena plays an important role. So, where does this leave us? For me, I think the answer, it's not more interoperability in the abstract. The answer needs to be much more selective and much more concrete. First, we need to start from the end, not from interoperability as an abstract goal or an abstract good or an abstract whatever. Second, in Europe, we need to move more explicitly to these application layer standards. And I think that also from a policy-making point of view, there needs to be a bit even more of selectiveness in this idea when we think about interoperability by design. No? What does that mean? Because that doesn't entail full interoperability everywhere. And that brings us also to the first, so it's a bit of a cycle. And I think that the building or the bridge between the regulation and the standard setting needs to be much better bridge or better built or construct. And that also requires that the revision of the regulation from 2012 actually takes place. And it's not happening at the speed. Every time you ask anybody within the European Commission, how is that going? It's like, oh, well, it's. And also conformity testing, machine-readable compliance, they need to be added to this set of wishes. Because at the end, what we need, as we said yesterday when we were talking about children's protection and the risk assessment of the DSA, we need methodologies so that interoperability can be verified. And it's not just aspirational, it's not just, let's do it, let's hope they will. No? We need to be able to prove it's working. So, that's it from my side. Thank you very much, and open to receive questions when the time reaches.
Fantastic, Begoña. So much said in so little time. Very interesting ideas. This idea of without standards there's no industrial metaverse is very provoking. And the standards are part of the scene and are part of the EU digital acquis. that is somehow sometimes contested also because it's maybe deplacing the legislators in a way. Let's see which reactions get from the audience later. But before that, to close the panel, we have Marta. Marta, I must say that you are a very brave lawyer to come here to step into a room full of dangerous academics with tons of questions and step into the lion's den. And we value a lot the perspective of the practitioners, and I'm very sure this will be a very interesting comment and a very interesting intervention. I will upload now your presentation for visibility here, and you have the floor now, please.
Well, sorry. Can you hear me, more or less? Yes. Yeah? Perfect. So yeah, now I'm a practitioner. My co-panelists are scholars. I wasn't a scholar till recently, but I moved to legal practice. So today I'm gonna talk about digital twins and intellectual property for approximately the next 20 minutes. So digital twins is a technology that is reshaping the industry, logistic, urban planning, and even health. I want to comment on the legal questions or challenges that this technology is posing on the legal framework that we have in intellectual property. I want to be clear from the beginning. My thesis is really simple. Digital twins should not break the logic of intellectual property rules. Mm-hmm. Every time there is something new, like artificial intelligence, the metaverse, we say, wow, intellectual property law is not going to survive. I think the logic is quite the same till centuries ago, and it should remain the same. That doesn't mean that we have to, sometimes laws should be amended or surgically amended to cover a new situation. But as I mentioned, the logic should be maintained. Before I move to the legal questions, I want to explain what a digital twin is. And here we have a definition: is a realistic digital representation of something physical requiring data connection between the two. So that means, for example, that it needs sensor data flows or real-time performance information. The quality of the digital twin depends on input data, model fidelity, and the quality of the output visualization. Now, from the manufacturing sector, I got another definition, that is, a digital twin is a dynamic digital representation that enables companies to optimize their assets, processes, and even entire businesses. And to illustrate what I'm saying here, I want to mention the two most typical examples of digital twins. I'm sure you must have heard about them. The first one are the digital twins created by Tesla. So they are creating these twins with data of the users' vehicles, and they are used in order to prevent, for example, the faults or defects that the car may have, in order to prevent them. And then Singapore has a digital twin of the city that I find is very novel, and it's very useful apparently for urban planning, transport, logistics, and even emergency response. But there are many other instances. Rolls-Royce has also digital twins of the engines in order to improve the aircraft engine maintenance. And there are also bio-twins. I think this is very top, really cool. And they can help with cancer screening, which is a very important topic. But let's come back to the example of Tesla. The company has the infrastructure, the software, the digital representation, etc. But who owns the data? We said that the company is using consumers' vehicles data in order to feed the digital twin. But is the consumer the one having a claim on the data? Is Tesla the one having ownership over the data. I don't like the word ownership in this context, but I will come to that point later. And what about the digital representation? Is this a work? Is this data? And who owns this digital representation? Those are the kind of questions that I would like to address in my presentation. But in order to identify the legal risks, but also the legal possibilities, we should not look at the digital twin as a black box. Rather, we have to follow the file and understand what is going on there. The creation of a digital twin is like a technical chain. It all begins with computer-aided design file, kind of the digital blueprint, that is transformed into a structured mesh file, kind of the 3D scheme, and then again translated into machine instructions. But the digital twin is not static, rather dynamic, so sensors are placed in the physical object, we can say, and there's a stream of data. Those data are in a database and are being processed by algorithms so that we can get predictions or diagnosis. So the engine is not going to work properly, and before it happens, please fix it. This is kind of the logic. And now, what parts of the digital twin can be protected? Here, I don't want to focus on the digital twin as a whole, but rather on how to protect the different components. And first of all, we have software. Software is protected by copyright. I think this is by now common knowledge. But what software do we have here? We have lines of code expressing the algorithms that forecast the predictions, or that forecast the failures and so on. Then we have codes, so for the architecture, managing the whole digital environment. And we have also software for bringing together the physical object and the digital environment. And software is protected by copyright indeed, but only when it is original. So the authors on intellectual creation that is expressed by free and creative choices. What does it mean? How is originality, how should originality be interpreted? If I'm honest, I don't know anymore. The Court of Justice, in my humble opinion, has been quite enigmatic in the last ruling that it has issued on this really important topic, but I'm going to try to explain what is going on here. Copyright doesn't protect ideas, so what the software does, but rather the expression, so how the line of codes are expressed. And if there's only one way to express those lines of work, those lines of code, then there should not be copyright protection. But if there are different ways of expressing the same idea and the developer decides to employ one specific method that goes beyond what is standard in the state of art, then there should be protection. This is a simplification, but I think it should be quite clear that we cannot expect the same kind of creativity from Michelangelo than from a software developer. We are really working with different kind of works. And what about the graphical interface? The Court of Justice has already stated, and this time I agree with the approach, that the graphical user interfaces cannot get the protection that the software has. So the protection should not be extended, but they can also be protected as works if they are original. Again, the author's intellectual creation, whatever it means right now. About the interfaces, the graphics, the icons, I just want to mention that they can also be protected as designs. And what about the physical object? Because the digital twin, at the end, is a representation of a physical object. And sometimes what is being modeled is a building or a work of applied art, a work of architecture. So for those cases, authorization is needed. Every reproduction that is happening within the digital twin needs authorization because there is an act of reproduction. And now let's go to the field of video game simulation. When you are copying somehow buildings or stadiums or even tattoos, you need authorization, right? So the same should be true for digital twins and the metaverse. And here comes my favorite point. What about the databases? Is the data, for example, produced by the vehicle when the user is using it protected or not, and how? I mean, I wrote a doctoral thesis about this, and sometimes I still have doubts. It's a very complicated topic. And I would say that data per se is not protected by a property right in the terms of the civic code. But it can be protected, like the data set, by copyright, by the sui generis database right, by trade secrets and contractual means and technical protection measures. Now, when we talk about data sets, we all think about the sui generis database right. But do we get protection in that case? So in order to trigger the sui generis database protection, right protection, we need to have an investment in obtaining, verifying, or presenting the data. But not the investment is irrelevant if it is in creating new data. So machine-generated data is created or is obtained. Here's a huge debate. And I have read a lot of papers and opinions from legal scholars, legal practitioners saying that machine-generated data is created data, and that now with the Data Act should be clear. That the Data Act is saying that machine-generated data is out of the scope of the sui generis database right. I must say that I disagree. The internal data of how a machine is working is created data and should not get protection. But what about sensor capture data? If companies are investing a lot on putting or placing sensors to capture pre-existing realities, and other companies can also get this kind of data if they invest, why is this created data? I think they should deserve protection. And what about the Data Act? First of all, the Data Act is making a clarification. I believe that this is not a clarification, and the Data Act is raising a lot of new questions. But my opinion is that what the Data Act wants to say is that when the sui generis database right is interfering with the obligations that, of the Data Act, so the data sharing obligations, it should not be triggered, or it should not intervene with this kind of obligations. But this is my interpretation, and I guess there will be a lot of litigation or discussions on this field. Again, if we don't have the sui generis database right protection, we can always rely on contracts or technical protection measures, but taking into account that contracts have only inter-party effects, so we don't get the erga omnes protection of IP rights, and the remedies are limited compared to, for example, injunctions. This is something that I guess data holders don't really like. I have heard also some comments saying, well, we should extend the inter-party effects when the object of the contract is data. I disagree with this approach. This is a basic concept of civil law, and I don't see why these inter-party effects should be extended. I want to get a bit deeper into the connection between the physical object and the digital representation. We were mentioning that you need authorization if you want to model a physical object. That should be quite clear. But is the digital representation protected by copyright, for example? Here we have a paradox, because what I have understood is that companies want to achieve a high degree of realism. So they want to represent the reality and there's not so much room for creativity here. So they are investing a lot in this kind of technology, in this kind of modern representations, but copyright doesn't protect work or investment, it protects originality. That said, the visual whole could be protected as a database if the elements are systematically arranged or arranged in a methodical way, and they are individually accessible. But that's another topic. Now, I could say that the digital twin is like a crowded environment. We have the owner of the platform that is regulating everything via licenses, then the developer of the architecture, the user that is producing the data, and artificial intelligence as well. This is something that I wanted to comment at the end, but I think I'm talking more than I predicted, so I will address it quickly now. Artificial intelligence is playing a key role in the metaverse, in the virtual environments and digital twins. So it's being used, for example, to create 3D representations. And here we have the whole debate that is forever going on of whether artificial intelligence generated outputs can be protected by copyright or not. First of all, I don't like the meaning of AI generated, because it's associated with the idea of the output is created without any human intervention, and that's not true. The AI system cannot create from the scratch. There's always human intervention. The thing is that human intervention may not be of an original nature. So if I'm at home writing a simple prompt and talking with the AI, the prompt is not protected and the output should not be protected. But there are really long and creative conversations with AI systems, right? So I think that if you are guiding the model and you are producing an output just using AI as a tool, then the output should be protected and the user should be the right holder. And how do we organize this environment that is full of different right holders? Do we need new rules? In my opinion, no. We have many rules, for example, in our civil code regulating co-ownership. In intellectual property regulations, we will find rules about co-authorships, works made for hire, works made in the employment context. So why don't we work first with what we have? We still have room for playing and organizing all these kind of contributions. And what kind of infringement can happen in the creation of the digital twin? First of all, we were talking about the software. And, first, sorry, I want to talk about 3D scanning. So this structure mesh file is of great economic significance, but it could also lead to unauthorized manufacture, whether through misappropriation of the file or through digital scanning and reverse engineering of the physical object. Then what about software? There's a lot of lines of code here, and I think it's needless to say that all the assignments of right, the licenses, should be organized by contractual means, and lawyers should be really precise and methodical here. And all legal practitioners or academics, I think we all have dealt with the following situation. You have a friend that is a software developer, and you are talking about how do they manage to comply with copyright law, whether they are familiar with those rules, etc. And they always answer, yeah, I'm not using code or components that are not licensed under open source licenses. And they are open source, so basically I can do everything. Ooh, that's dangerous, I would say. Especially when they are integrating code that is, or components that are licensed under open source licensing with copyleft clauses. This could paralyze the project at the later stage if you cannot comply with those conditions. So I think our friends that are software developers should be a bit careful here. And then what about the changes of the format of the files, because at the beginning I was explaining that all begins with a computer-aided design file that is transformed into a surface mesh file and then into machine instructions. So in my opinion, the changes of the format, so of the container, should not lead to an infringement of the right of transformation if the design, so the creative expression is the same. But if you use those changes of files to modify something else, so the dimension of the original work, or how it looks, or you finish something that in reality wasn't finished, then we may have a problem under the right of transformation. And finally, what about the data? Is Tesla, for example, infringing any right by using the data of the user? That's something that I would maybe leave for the debate. I will skip that. And another important question: who owns the data that the digital twin is producing, creating, whatever you want? Does it have sui generis database the sui generis database right protection? Is this data protected by copyright, by trade secrets? What should the legal regime be? Seeing how things are evolving, I could say that probably the data that is created by the digital twin will not get copyright, sui generis database right protection, precisely because it may be considered created and not obtained. But I think we should be careful here and analyze every case. So how is the technology functioning? Because sometimes, even if the data is created, if there's another and further substantial investment in verifying or presenting the data, companies can still get protection. So that was all from my side. I want to repeat what I said at the beginning. The IP rules, or the logic of IP rules, should remain the same. I think we have a robust legal framework with which we can't really work. We have to apply it in a surgical way, be really precise again. But we have room for creativity, and I don't think we need new IP rules for these kind of cases, neither for artificial intelligence. Thank you so much for your attention. I hope you found this presentation interesting, and I'm open to questions and every kind of comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marta. Thanks for helping us navigate this, all the case law on copyright from the Court of Justice of the EU and bringing so many interesting ideas. I remember also in the first edition of our Congress in 2024, IP was also considered dead already or killed already, and here it is, healthy as an apple, and yeah, and it will continue, hopefully, so in the next future. We have some minutes now for questions from the audience. Great.
Thank you. It's more a comment than a question to what Dr. González Otero has said regarding the effectiveness of standardization somehow. Because I think that one of the important elements to consider is, as you said, the reason for which we standardize. Because very often in Europe it happens that we standardize as a way to try to change the market dynamics because we don't like the current market. That's the point. So just to make an example, Gaia X has you start smiling. Okay, said everything. Okay, I don't know if everyone is familiar with Gaia X, but it was essentially a way to create some kind of semantic layer on top of current cloud infrastructure, so to make simple to move from one service provider, from one cloud provider to another one. Now, from a technical point of view, it was not even bad, I have to say. The results are good. My company was a first-day founder of Gaia X. We worked for 2 or 3 years with them, then we decided to stop because it was not in our business actually. And the problem is that no one is adopting IX. That's the situation. There is not a law in Europe that says on public procurement you have to provide the Gaia-X compatible system or whatever. And the problem, it happened because if you look at cloud providers, that essentially North American cloud providers, they have thousands of people working every day and night to develop services, while Gaia-X was a very limited number of people that meet from time to time and try to write specifications. So this is the difference in terms of power. But you could say a totally different, possibly different outcome that is about the digital product passport. So digital product passport, that I work with standardization of it a lot, essentially means that from 2028, when we will buy a product that comes from some specific product categories like textile, footwear, car batteries, toys, fishing nets, furniture, and other, we have this QR code that gives us some information about the product in terms of eco-sustainability, how to reuse, repair, recycle, whatever.
Yep.
While we were developing the standards, actually I proposed at the point that says, when I scan the QR code and I land on a website that provides the information to me, no personal information could ever be collected for whatever reason, so no user profiling. And I proposed this because my idea is that if we allow for user profiling, it will be very simple for a big advertisement company like Meta to provide the infrastructure for free to get the data and the behavioral habits of European customers. Just to tell you what user profiling means has required several hours discussion inside the technical committee, because there are no law professors like you in the committee, so we are all technicians, so for me as a meaning, but it's just me. But this could be a more successful standardization effort because we are creating the market now, because the market started from the SPR regulation, for sustainability product regulation, then which is mandatory. So this is on the demand side, stop. Then we have a standard that is for new, not because the market has really existed, and that contains this kind of safeguards. This safeguard is stronger than GDPR, because under GDPR you could collect this kind of information. They said, no, you cannot collect this information at all. And these, for me, are two very paradigmatic examples of differences in approaching standardization. As you say, the interoperability is not a mean by itself. It should be under some more relevant policy goals. Gaia-X was about interoperability, and it don't have a lot of success for this reason. This one could be different because it has anticipated the market. So this is the problem. We could standardize everything if we start before the market. Now apply this to AI and you have the solution, okay? So consider what is happening to AI in the Committee for Standardization. That's it.
It's, okay, that's the question. All right.
The question was more a comment.
more
More
comment.
comment.
You
Okay.
already
a quick reaction.
Okay.
On
quick
that,
reaction.
Begoña.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I think one of the points right now on the review of the 1025, so the European Standards Regulation, actually tries to go into that direction to involve much more civil society members in the standardization process. And then we also need to look at the standards. I mean, we normally talk about technical standards, doesn't matter. So we interchange when we're talking about connectivity standards that actually do have a very clear kind of path, no? Like when we're talking about 5G, 6G, 3G. But then there are other type of technical standards, like ones with AI, like the ones when we're talking, so for industrial metaverse or so on. So, and yeah, I mean, we do need much more interdisciplinary work in a sense, in that sense. As I said, it's very, and that's also the warning, but I think that's also a lesson for the policy maker, and I think there are means, sometimes, I don't want to say it's laziness, I think it's sometimes that it's political wish that doesn't get the right impact assessments behind, and then we want to do things too early. And the idea, as I mentioned, you can also draw or write red lines. you don't want this to go into this direction. We also had this discussion yesterday when we were talking about the by design coin, or term that it's now attached to almost everything. So I do think we have the ingredients, but I think we still are missing a proper chef or a cooker that actually comes and puts that together and make that attractive enough for all stakeholders involved, so that flourishes and goes. I think the framework proposed by Hans Miklitz, actually in this report, he proposes a new framework for the regulation. I mean, I have the feeling that the Commission might have heard a little bit, but not enough. So it's a matter of keep on pushing. And yeah, Gaia X, Catena X actually it's working. And it's actually, and it came from Gaia X, but it was this French-German endeavor coming from public institutes and the industry, and with a lot of good intentions, as I said. But you need more than intentions.
Very well. We have time for one more question.
Thank you. That was fascinating in lots of ways. My question is probably most directly for Kasper, but interested to hear perspectives. When you were talking about workers' rights, I was really struck by what you were saying about the fact that in some cases there is legal provision, for example, to prohibit biometric fingerprinting and behavioural profiling, but that those laws are unlikely to be utilised by the people who would need them because of their kind of disenfranchised, disempowered status. So as much as I'm taking your central premise that we should focus on laws of immersion rather than transaction, like how would, is that not just sort of moving the goalposts? What do we need in terms of empowering workers through, stronger union representation or kind of class action? What do we need for those laws that in theory are there to protect those workers' rights, for those rights to actually be enabled?
Thank you very much for this question. It's very important to be asking this now. And I'll make the caveat that there's no single golden bullet solution that needs to be followed. But I wrote my first draft for this presentation with the thought that we cannot afford to be limiting digital fairness and fairness by design to just consumers. And in consumer law, fairness by design, to my knowledge, the first formulation came from a book by Christine Rifa in 2018, Consumer Theories of Harm. And the concept was then fine-tuned over the years on the basis of also drawing inspiration from the literature on Article 25 GDPR on protection, data protection by design and by default. So, long story short, we cannot forfeit disclosure, for instance. We need disclosure. Without disclosure, we know nothing. But we cannot hope for it to solve our problems. It's great that we have disclosure to workers' representations, but this will not solve the problem either, at least definitely not fully. So my bottom line is, if we want a fair industrial metaverse, we have to be, and again, I'm also perpetuating the by design suffix, but we do need fairness by design in a much broader sense than it is currently discussed in consumer law. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We are wrapping up with that because we are a bit behind schedule. Sorry if there were more questions. I encourage you to take advantage of the time of break with some coffee now to continue with the very meaningful discussions. We will reconvene in 20 minutes time. Thank you very much for the session. Hello, hello.